JR, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and you've been on this exit journey for a good, year? Yeah.
More than that.
Yeah.
So my name is JR Rivas. We run an Airbnb done for you program where we handle the locating of the property and the interior design of the property. And pretty much from like a year in the journey, we were like, oh, I didn't even know you could sell a company unless it was like a multi-million, billion-dollar endeavor.
Right.
And so we started to ask around and talk to people. And I actually had a friend that sold an agency that had declining revenue and no salespeople, and they managed to get a 7-figure offer.
Wow.
With 80% up front. So once I heard that, I was like, oh, maybe like I can sell a business.
Yeah.
So I started talking to brokers. We basically started planning for the exit from like 9 months into starting the company.
Okay.
And our revenue had already kind of been on an upward trajectory. So we listed the company in February at right at the 2-year mark. And we've entertained a lot of different offers. We were under contract once and then fell out. And now we're under contract again.
Awesome. So you did it a little different than most people I interact with. You got the idea that, hey, we might be able to sell this thing very early in the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so what things did you do differently? Like, well, you might not know, but what did you intentionally say, okay, we got to do this differently because we're building this to sell?
Yeah, so I had a friend who went on Shark Tank and he ended up getting a deal, but from Mark Cuban, but in the due diligence process, they told him like, yeah, we really don't want to do this deal. You should just sell it. I probably have a buyer for you. And then he sold it. And the buyer or Mark Cuban's team told him, if you would have sold this like 9 months earlier, you would have gotten like 4 times the money for it. And that always stuck with me because by the time someone wants to sell, they've gone through that part where now they're not going to get what they could have gotten at their peak.
Yeah.
So that always stuck with me. And as entrepreneurs, like we all have ideas. Like I know I could spin up another business tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I wasn't so much married to the idea. As for your question of what we did differently, we started to engineer the company from a perspective of a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And that was interesting because the biggest takeaway was that everything that a buyer looks for is how to eliminate risk.
Yeah.
So everything that you do to get your company ready to sell actually makes it a better company. So you should be doing it anyways.
Right.
And I just learned so much about what actually makes a company valuable by talking to these people, talking to you, and just asking questions. To now where I'm like, okay, if I were to start another company, it's probably going to be better than this because from day one, I'm going to find recurring revenue. I'm going to look for a certain CAC to LTV.
Yeah.
I'm going to look for a certain business model that would appeal to, and I'm going to know from day one, like what are they going to say when we're at the table negotiating? What are they going to say?
Right.
And I'm going to work from day one versus when you're already sick and tired of the business, which I've kind of gotten to the point, like through the exit, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I can't wait to get this over. Like I have so much deal fatigue right now.
Yeah.
But I'm poker face.
That's real deal fatigue.
On the calls, I'm poker face. Like I'm always like, yeah, we'll run it for a few more years. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, I can't wait for this to be done.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much gold in what you just said. Deal fatigue, it is real. I often tell people, take calls before you're ready because of what you said. You don't want to plateau and then try and sell. Mm-hmm. People are buying cash flow, right? So you want to still have upward trajectory and growth that's available. So if you're trying to grow your company and be on that upward trajectory, and then you've got to take calls, having a deal room ready and having other people who can participate in the calls and the due diligence is really important. But you don't know that if you haven't come into it with the benefit of, you had a few people who had done exits, you'd been asking questions and reading and all of those things. So hopefully people like rewind that and re-listen to what you said, because you hit several really important key points there. When did you start? I assume you have a deal room now where you have like data in the sandbox type of thing. When did you start that part?
So at around the 1 year mark, when we were like, we're going to try to sell at the 2 year mark, we started asking, we were working with this guy who was like consults for you on a monthly basis. He's like, this is what you're going to need. You need to get your face out of the ads.
Yeah.
You need to show that someone else can do the coaching calls. You need to show that someone else can do XYZ. You need all these management people in place. So we started to know what they were going to ask for. And we started kind of putting it together early on so that we could get ahead of those, and not only get ahead of the objections, but say to them, oh, a year ago we were doing it like this, and in preparation for this sale, we started doing it like this.
Yes.
And that was a big question, like, why are you guys selling? You're at the 2 year mark, you're on this upward trajectory. So our answer was like, well, we've always planned, this has been the plan from day one.
We came in here ready to sell,
So I think that helped us out a lot. But
helps you out in the deal, because you're not a stressed out buyer who has to dump it. And that answer says, like, we built this from day one, so we don't need your desperation.
But we still made a lot of mistakes. Like I was telling you today, I didn't go to school for accounting, and I realized through this process our accounting method was completely wrong, and for our type of business, which I've never even thought twice about in my life. So there's still some mistakes, but next time around, it's going to be a lot more tidy, and having your books in order and stuff like that, which we tried to do as much as we could, but without the knowledge of what they're going to ask for, like what's an adjusting entries report? I just learned that one this week. What's a compilation report? So all these different things that now I know, the next time around, this is going to be so much easier.
You know, what's interesting is I think there's a statistic, and this isn't exactly accurate, but it's something like the Small Business Association says only 30% of business owners get their financials. 5% do something to open and look at them. That doesn't say how many people take action on them. But the kinds of things you just talked about, and cash base versus accrual base and all those things, it makes a difference if you're planning to sell. But how many business owners do you know who are just running it with a entry-level bookkeeper? That's better than doing it on the back of a napkin. But when you get to the place where you're ready to sell, you need somebody who's like, how do we do an adjusting entries report, and what does it even mean?
Exactly. So then it's like hours with accountants that I've never,
hours in dollars.
Our person doesn't understand this stuff. So now I'm on Upwork and I'm interviewing these people, and I'm trying to find someone who's done this before and done this for exits. And you're kind of scrambling because there's all these deadlines. So it's a lot. It's a lot if you don't have someone holding your hand that's done this.
So last year when we met, and you're like, I'm selling my business in February, and I started asking you a few questions. Do you remember back to that moment? Like, what was your biggest aha, like, ooh, I might not be ready in February?
Well, it wasn't that we weren't ready in February. It was that for the number that I was telling you we wanted, we weren't ready. And we didn't get that number. But we got within 14% of that number.
Awesome.
And I'm very happy with the deal. I'm very happy to move on with my life. And I'm very happy that, like I said, I have a million ideas. So I know I'm going to spin something out bigger and better. And now knowing what I know, the next business is going to have all these components.
You'll have an accountant right up front.
And we're going to we'll probably exit that one. Another big lesson, wait till 3 years if you can. But we'll probably exit right at 3 years for a bigger multiple and with a better model.
And maybe less stress.
And much less stress.
So what are the things, after we talked that night, what are the things you like went back home and you're like, we got to do a couple things different right away? So I immediately went back home. I talked to my business partner. Well, I was texting him like mid-conversation with you. I'm like, Lani says we have to do this. Lani says we have to do that. And the biggest things were not trusting the broker 100%, because your broker, think of it as like a real estate agent. If you're selling your house for $600,000 and they have an offer for $575, but they know that they could get maybe $630 if you waited a little bit longer or whatever, most likely they're going to take the $575. So they don't necessarily have your best interest in mind, although they're great people. They help out a lot. They're very knowledgeable. But at the end of the day, like, sometimes they might steer you towards a deal
because they know that this person has a higher shot of closing,
Yeah.
even though it's not the best deal.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of play the game of the buyer, and you have to play the game with the broker as
Yeah.
well. And there's been times where like I tell my broker, because I know when my broker takes this to the buyer, she needs conviction.
Yeah.
So I give it to her as like, this is a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's probably not.
Yeah.
Just so that she carries that conviction over
Yeah.
to that conversation.
So she doesn't feel like we could fudge here.
Exactly.
And that's fudging with your future.
Exactly. So that's a big thing. You have to be so detail oriented because there's 101 ways that you will get got in these deals.
Yeah.
In ways that like you can't even imagine. And not that like business buyers are scrupulous or whatever, but they're business people and
Yeah.
they've done this before. They have a lot of experience. They've bought and sold. So they know how to put in deal terms that are really favorable and try to sell them off to you as if, oh, everybody does this.
Yeah. And you experienced that in your first offer. Yeah. Now, isn't your buyer the same buyer, just
Yeah.
came
So
back and said, okay, let's
we've
talk?
had many interviews. So we were under contract. We ended up we pulled out of that agreement because me and my business partner, we didn't like the earnout portion, and we just really felt like we weren't going to get the portion of the earnout.
Yeah.
The other big reason we pulled out was our broker was charging us 10%, which I didn't know at the time is like outrageous.
Yeah.
At least for I don't know, maybe there's some industries, but for our industry, that's extremely high. We've had offers as low as like 4% for brokers that were just as credible.
Yeah.
And when you're talking millions of dollars, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
Especially divided by two in a partnership.
Yeah. So I would say, those were definitely some big realizations.
Yeah. So you said the big earnout word. So this is a big, like, do I, don't I conversation. And from my perspective, I've been on the buyer side. You know, I've been on the acquisition side when I was in corporate. I've been on the selling side when I was trying to sell my gym before COVID, which closed it down, so we didn't have to deal with that. But the people who come in, and this is smaller buyers who are like, you're dealing with a buyer, right? But it's also like private equity deals where they bring in a whole team of mergers and acquisitions peoples and lawyers, and, you know, people are really overwhelmed with that process. And everybody is trying to sell this idea of the earnout. And so people are like, should I take it? Should I not? Generally, the earnout is the promise of what they call the second bite of the apple. So leave $5 million in, and in 3 to 5 years, we turn that into $15 million. So it'd be like a private equity type of a thing. I don't know, and you don't have to disclose your deal terms about what your earnout is. So it's like there's this promise of more at the end. And then, and so that sounds attractive. You know, I roll $5 million in equity, and in 3 to 5 years, I have $15 million. Like, who wouldn't do that deal? But the other side of that is the terms of how the earnout is earned. The seller often loses control of the thing that will create that result. And they become a longer term employee of the business or a consultant of the business or something, but they've lost control. And so oftentimes people don't end up with their earnout. I don't have data on when a small business is purchased by a single owner or a couple of people who buy it, how many people actually get their earnout. But I know on the private equity side, less than, I think it's 73% of CEOs don't make it to the 5-year period. They're ousted because they won't do the hard things that take it from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% profit to 20, 25% profit. So did you and your partner, I know you have an earnout, you don't have to discuss the terms of that, but did you have to struggle with, I want more cash up front versus I do want to stick around, or that second bite of the apple sounds good? Walk us through what goes through the seller's mind and the decision to say, all right, fine, I'll take an earnout.
So the first deal had an earnout. The second deal, it's like an equity earn in. I don't know what the VC term is for it. So it was a long journey with the earnout. Number one, I feel like if you are going to take an earnout, you should get at least 70% cash up front, in my opinion. We had a call with this guy who had built like a 9-figure company and sold it. Very popular software that people have heard of. And he told me, he was like, never on a Zoom call, he's like, never take an earn out. All I've ever seen it done is create hard feelings, and you never get the money.
Yeah.
So once he said that, I was like, am I okay with getting this cash up front if I never get another dollar?
Right.
And the answer is yes. And I'm obviously sticking around. Like, I have nothing planned yet after this. I'm gonna help the buyer succeed as much as I possibly can, be as available as I can for him, genuinely help him to reach his goals.
Yeah.
But I understand, like, there's very specific goals to hit, and maybe if we fall a little bit shy of that, then we might not earn the equity for that year, whatever. So that's kind of how I would look at it. But when it's like, well, 20% up front, and then if you hit this goal next year. I've also heard all kinds of different earnouts. I had a buddy who his earnout was based on maintaining 80% of the revenue, which he felt like the guy would have to be an idiot to mess that up.
Yeah.
So I would say it's very complex, and there's always a lot of terms in the earnouts, and definitely have a lawyer. That was another mistake I made. I signed an LOI without an attorney because I was like, oh, it's non-binding, but there's a clause 14, binding provisions.
Yeah.
This, and this are binding. So that was a whole, learning lesson. So there's just a lot of missteps that you can make, and really just understanding what's normal. Like, maybe having another thing is, we've gone through 3 attorneys now. One worked with tech startups for the most part. So those deals were just completely different.
Yeah.
So he would throw out all this stuff, and then we would take it to the broker, and she'd be like, well, that's not for a deal like this.
Yeah.
And then once I really asked around and talked to people, I realized, like, yeah, she's probably right. And he was very, very aggressive, to the point where, like, we took his remarks, and we took it to another lawyer, and the other lawyer was like, this wouldn't kill the deal for me if I was on the other end. But as their lawyer, I would say, well, if they're going to go this aggressive, then now we have to go way more aggressive and then dial it back. So there's even a mini game to play, or a side quest with, like, which lawyer you choose and what's your strategy and how do you think they're going to play ball on their end. So it is a real life game of chess, but the consequences for making bad decisions are high.
Yeah. No, for real. And you can't go back because, like you said, there's contracts and lawyers on each side ready to go all in. What I heard in that is being really clear on what you're okay to walk away with. And I heard that in the broker conversation as well. It's like, here's the direction I gave her, and she thought there was no wiggle room because here's the number we must have. And then knowing that in the earnout, that's a really great way to think about, okay, I got to get the number I need up front. And then if that never happens, I'm still in great shape for whatever it is the next piece of the journey is. I also feel like, and often say, the people who successfully make it through, a life-changing exit, is they're really clear on what the exit gets them in terms of life, other opportunities, next business, whatever. So calling out that clarity, I think, is important, because often people don't take the time to get really clear on what that is. And it sounds like you've done that work to say, what does this mean, and what am I really willing to take? So what's on the other side of exit for you? I heard you say, I might start something else and build that for exit and do it different. But, like, in terms of what does this exit really create for you on a deeper level? I mean, another business, but like you said, you have a million ideas, and 90% of them could work, and, you're smart and you can do that. But what does it create for you?
Yeah, great question. So at the end of your talk yesterday, you basically, in different words, stated that after you went on this entire journey, you kind of realized, like, your one, I don't know if you would call it regret or whatever, was like, sometimes I think I should have just been on welfare so I could be with my kid.
Yeah.
And if I was like 22, that I would have been like, this is crazy. Like,
Yeah.
she's made so much money. Like, maybe she just didn't make enough or
Yeah.
whatever, which I know you've made
Yeah.
plenty
Yeah.
enough, plenty enough.
Yeah, it's not that.
But now at 30, I'm like, that's what I want. So I want to have an exit. I want to take a year or however much time we need to help the buyer.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I want to have a kid, get married, and take my time figuring out, like, take some time to properly invest the money. I want to give away a lot of it, like a big chunk for it. And I have some ideas for that and some people I'm working with. So most people's answer, I think, here would be like, well, I want to start another business. I want to invest that to 10x or 100x. I don't know if I can curse here, but I could give a fuck about.
You can curse all you want.
I could give a fuck about 100xing it.
Yeah.
I think just optimizing for more quality of life. And I've fantasized about all these ideas of what to do. Everything from like building a very simple, like I've built spreadsheets on how I can build a business to make $1 million a year with 3 people, 3 full-time people.
Yeah.
And down to like how much time it would take for each client, how much of my time would it take to, and I could see that being a thing. And I think I could do that and be very comfortable, even if I don't get to $1 million EBITDA, or maybe I could sell that. But I have some ideas that are also like big plays too, that I think could be like $100 million companies, or like take a crack at like very, very difficult problems. But these are all just ideas swirling in my head. Like the other day, I like, my girlfriend is a PA, and I said, how do hospitals communicate patient information between hospitals?
It's a mess.
Exactly.
It's a mess.
And I was like, that's $1 billion idea. Do I want to kill myself to do that? It sounds exciting. It sounds amazing. I'm sure someone's thought of it. Someone's maybe tried it and failed. But that's a really big problem that you could make $1 billion with if you could figure out how to solve. So one day I wake up, I'm like, I want to do that. The next day I'm like, a 2-person, 3-person company with high 80% profit margins where I have to work 5 hours a week and I can hang out with my kid. That would be amazing. And give money away and all that stuff. Hang out with my friends, see my family. My mom's getting old. I just saw her in Tallahassee.
We'll edit that out so she doesn't hear that part.
She knows it.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, I see her every now and then, and based on life expectancy, I probably have like statistically 60 more times that I'm going to see her.
That hits different.
Exactly. So I think when I was younger, all I wanted to do was just make more. I bought a Lamborghini last year. I think around the time I met you, I'd bought a Lamborghini. I have 17 properties in my portfolio, a few of them over $1 million each. And every time I've acquired more stuff, it's just brought more responsibility and never more happiness. So I'm like, I actually want to scale down, and I want to maybe get a smaller place, and maybe, like the other day I was like, maybe I should buy a Prius or a Tesla instead of having a Lamborghini.
You can do that. Just don't get in the fast lane and go just under the speed limit and manage the battery life in the fast lane. I'm good with it if you just stay over there in the slow lane.
Yeah. So I think most of my goals post exit are more around like who I'll become versus like what I'll make. And that's what I think I'm super excited about.
That's amazing at 30 years old. You have an old soul.
Yeah, well, I started business at 18. 18, I started a tax business, which technically this would be like my second exit because I sold the tax business, but it was one of those deals that you warn people against. Like it was like an equity transfer or debt transfer seller finance deal that I never got paid on. And, but I technically exited that business when I was like 22. So I started business at 18. So now I'm 30. It's 12 years of grinding, hiring people.
Well, and as an entrepreneur, that's like dog years.
There's
no playbook and no SOP when you start like that. And I know that you've already done things to like take care of your mom and that kind of stuff. You bought the house and all that kind of stuff. So you're just an amazing human, and I love just where your headspace is, and I love hearing your story and like all the things you want to do after. It's just a pleasure to know you and an honor to be involved in.
Thank you. And thank you for all your help too. Like I remember last year on the cruise, I was like, I need to sit next to Lani every single day. And I just asked you a million questions.
Do you remember when I was like, so tell me about your sales process? Because one of the major things is, do you have consistent, repeatable, optimized sales process? That's going to give you value. And then if you also have monthly recurring revenue, in addition to that, it's like, okay, now we're talking, right? And you were telling me like about your social seller who closed most of your deals. And I'm like, but you're going to have like 75-year-old guys sitting in a boardroom who've never heard about social sellers, and you've got a 17-year-old in Canada whose mom's going to ground him if his grades drop, and that's your sales. Like, do you remember that moment? I was dying inside laughing.
So since then, he actually left because he turned 18. This kid was 17, making 10 grand a month.
People probably thought I was kidding. They're like, he turned 18 and he left.
And then he was like, I feel like I've hit a ceiling here. I want to go be a closer, because he was just an appointment setter.
Yeah.
And he ended up leaving. We had figured out another traffic source by that time, and now we got someone else to take over his job. So now we have 2 traffic sources.
Great.
And yeah, that we definitely heard you on that.
Yeah. Well, it's just those of us who live in the digital world, we sort of lose track of what people in the non-digital world think about and how they consume. I know when I was introduced to social selling, I was like, these people are literally messaging on their phone. But, you know, when I left corporate, it was through social sellers selling my product, right? So, yeah, that was really a fun night for me.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm glad you got a lot out of that. If people want to know more about you, follow you, you know, learn about your journey, where would they go?
So I heard recently that the highest IQ social media is X. So I've started to try to be more active on there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, follow me on X. Just search for JR Rivas, RIVAS on X.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.
Yeah.